Wow, I guess it is pretty dark in here. A little bit extra light really won't hurt all too much. Oh. And that is barely helpful, but nonetheless, it is 5 o'clock. It is time to start Just G Live here on YouTube. My name is George Ruggiero, and this is a kind of special episode. Instead of continuing on with the series that we've been on the last little while, we will be taking on, or taking a look, I should say, at one of the mock drafts put together for this coming NFL draft that is starting tomorrow and going through the 25th. In an interesting turn of events, they decided to continue the event, keep it going, even with the whole pandemic situation going on right now. The event is still happening. It will not be happening live. Instead, it will be happening virtually. Every pick will still be made, and every player will still be allowed to, get their phone call and all that. The only difference is instead of it all being in Vegas, it's all going to be from home, which for some people, that really is not much of a difference. And before I get into what I have for you guys this afternoon, let me just make sure that I have everything put as I like it, put together. All right, let's see here. Okay, so for this is a pre-draft episode. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking a look at and kind of talking about some of the storylines and looking at things through the eyes of Mel Kiper. In this case, I'm using his most recent mock draft to look at what teams might do. And this does not take into account trades, but if there's been any chatter or any smoke of a trade that I've heard, I will be going over that. I will be talking about it. And there are 32 teams, 32 picks. Some of these I will have more to say about than others. If I'm being completely honest, some of these players that are getting picked, I don't know a whole lot about. I've tried to do as much research and as much film as I can, but that really doesn't give you the best picture or a full picture of what a player is and what they've been able to do either in college or in the combine, or I would say at pro days, but there haven't been any pro days. So we will start obviously starting at the top of the draft. And as we go through this, I'm going to what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down the team that's picking and the player that is suggested for pick. And like I said earlier, this is all per Mel Kiper. He's an ESPN football analyst. He's been doing the draft and everything related to the draft for the last little while. And also, I should also preface this, I'm only doing the first round. I'm not going to go into the second round. That's when things start to get a little more wonky, a little weirder when people start to reach for picks. That could happen in the first, but usually not a lot of reaches are made unless it's for a quarterback. So, and another interesting thing, Mel Kiper with his mock draft is not going to predict trades. And that's kind of why I'm using his. There are other analysts that try and decide beforehand what trades are going to be made, what picks are going to be thrown to which teams. And I don't like that because a lot of the time in the draft, trades are made at the drop of a hat. It can materialize within minutes and it can be something that nobody's been able to predict up until that point. So these are just going to be the picks that teams have now and what would be the best fit for that team. So let's get started with the first overall pick to the Cincinnati Bengals, and they realistically have been a mess the last couple of years. If you go back and watch the episodes about the AFC and stuck with a mediocre, I'd say he's a mediocre quarterback. I don't think Andy Dalton is a bad quarterback, but luckily enough for the Cincinnati Bengals, they now have the first overall pick and the opportunity to select Joe Burrow, who I'm also going to be trying to run through some stats through all of these. In 2019, last year, Joe Burrow, a senior at LSU, won the Heisman, won the national championship, won everything, threw over 5,600 yards, and threw for 60 touchdowns in a season, completing 76% of his passes. Now, realistically, that has to be one of the most dominant college football seasons by a quarterback of all time. I mean, he was unstoppable. He only threw 6 interceptions all year. I mean, that's a 10-to-1 ratio of touchdowns to interceptions. That's incredible. His completion percentage extremely high. And another thing, of course, people always talk about this. I don't know necessarily how much it actually matters for teams, but there's the whole thing. Oh, he'll be going home because he is originally from Athens, Ohio, and he will be going, hopefully, most likely, to the Cincinnati Bengals. Oh, he's a hometown kid. He'll go in and save the franchise. That whole deal. I don't put all too much stock in that. I don't think that really matters much for teams nowadays. Will it be interesting to see him suiting up for Cincinnati? Yes. Will he be good for Cincinnati? We don't know because he doesn't have a lot around him right now. And another interesting thing will be the market for Andy Dalton, because if they bring in someone like Burrow, you expect Burrow to be the day one starter. You expect him to step in day one after the season he just had, after all the accolades, all the trophies, everything, and all the, seals of approval that he's gotten. You expect him to be the day one starter. And if they decide he's not ready and have luckily been able to, if they've been able to hold on to Andy Dalton, he might end up starting for Cincinnati again. Do I think that'll happen? No. I think Joe Burrow will be their day one starter, and whether he sinks or floats, only time will tell with that one. To the second overall selection, the Washington Redskins are on the clock. And again, this realistically should be an easy pick for them. This one should be a no-brainer. Chase Young is not just the best defensive player in this draft. I think he's the best player overall in the draft. He is extremely dynamic. He brings so much to a defense. Ohio State's defense last year was very, very good. And I have to say, if Washington trades down to add more selections, I could understand that maybe, as long as they got, another top 10 pick and some other picks. It would, for them to move out of number 2 when there's such a surefire talent in Chase Young available, or probably available, you're going to have to get a king's ransom. You would have to get multiple firsts, multiple futures. You would have to get a lot. Or you should. I mean, I don't think Washington will be stupid enough to move out from this pick. I don't. I think they'll take Chase Young. They'll match him up with the rest of that really, really strong defense. Because no matter how much of a mess the Redskins are, they have a ton of talent on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, you got to look at it like this. Jonathan Allen, they got him last year in the draft. Already, they're starting left end. Linebacker Montez Sweat, again, very young guy, very, very solid. An inside linebacker, Ryan Kerrigan, very good. Kendall Fuller, at corner, really, really good. And if you can add another end and add some more dynamicism to a defense like that, that's now going to be coached by Ron Rivera, who's always had a really strong defense with Carolina, and Jack Del Rio, who helped mold arguably one of the best defensive players in football right now in Khalil Mack when he was coach of the Oakland Raiders. That could be an incredible defense, and a defense that should really, really, really scare the rest of the NFC East. As for their offense, well, that's something else that they'll have to try and address at the draft. So that would be Chase Young from Ohio State going to the Redskins. Now moving to the 3 pick, the Detroit Lions. So this is one of those picks, one of those selections that they have a pick that they should make after making some of their earlier offseason moves. They traded away Darius Slay. They brought in Desmond Trufant from Atlanta, and they kind of need some help on that side of the ball, and they really, really need some help on that side of the ball in the secondary. Luckily for them, there is an exceptional corner in this draft. Also coming out of Ohio State, Mel Kiper has Jeff Okudah being selected at the number 3 pick by the Detroit Lions to really help shore up that secondary and that set of defensive backs. And this is one of those picks that, again, Jeff Okudah is one of those talents who realistically is a no-brainer. It's a, no miss kind of prospect. He realistically is one of the top players in the draft. And it would not surprise me if Detroit just stuck with 3 and picked there. I have heard some chitter chatter about teams trying to trade up to the 3 pick or the 4 pick. And we'll get more into the 4 selection in just a minute. But I think it would really be silly for Detroit to trade out of that pick unless they knew exactly that they were going to be getting Okudah or someone else on the defensive side of the ball that's just as good. And that's where it gets difficult, is I don't know if there's another defensive back who's as good as just Jeff Okudah in this draft. I realistically don't think that there is. He was dominant with Ohio State. He had an incredible season last year. He 6'1", 200 pounds, very fast, 3 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, 35 tackles from a corner. That's production at an elite level in the college game, especially from that position. He was locked down on whichever side of the field he was playing, lined up against opponents. Number 1 receivers, game in and game out. Should be going to Detroit. I doubt they trade out of that pick unless it is assured that they get someone as good as Okudah or Okudah himself. Now moving to the New York Giants, selecting number 4 overall. And this is where things get weird. This is where some things get interesting. So over the last week, New York Giants general manager Dave Gettleman, who, if you've heard the show already on air, if you've heard it on the radio, I'm not the biggest fan of. I think that he is a little bit out of touch, I could say, with his talent evaluation. And I think this is one of those times where that may come to bite him. I've heard him throw out smoke screens pretty much, he's already hinted, he's put it out in the media saying, I might be willing to take Justin Herbert, the quarterback out of Oregon, at this pick. Why? You already have your quarterback of the future in Daniel Jones. He proved that to you last year. Eli Manning is retired. There's no roadblocks for Daniel Jones to take this team by the horns, grab the reins under new coach Joe Judge, and try and hit them back to the playoffs. There's no way around that. Now, if the Giants were to trade that pick down to, say, Miami, and keep in mind Miami has the 5 selection, it would likely take Miami the 5 and another pick, be that a second or a late first, to get up to the 4 just to assure that they get the quarterback or or the player they want. But that's the thing. A lot of the talent in this draft is in 2 positions, or 3 positions, I should say. Wide receiver, offensive line, and defensive backs and secondary, even some linebackers. One of those linebackers is a surefire thing, and the Giants would be stupid not to take him. He is incredible. Isaiah Simmons, the outside linebacker from Clemson, can do everything. And I mean everything. First of all, the man is 6'4", 230 pounds, playing linebacker. Cool. Awesome. Already, that's already a huge plus for a player playing that position. And last year, he had 67 solo tackles, 7 sacks, a forced fumble, 3 interceptions. And the interesting thing with all this is he doesn't just play linebacker. He's not a pure linebacker. He is so versatile. They played him at linebacker, middle linebacker, edge rusher, corner, safety. Realistically, this man can play 5 different defensive positions to the highest level. And realistically, if you look at what the Giants have right now and what they need is they need a game changer. They need a dynamic defensive player on that team. Could their offensive line be better? Yes. But have they made strides recently to fix that offensive line? Yes. They have the quarterback. They have the running back. They have players at the skill positions on the offensive side of the ball. They need a player like Simmons. And if Dave Gettleman decides not to take him, decides, you know what, Simmons, we don't know where we'd play him. We don't know what we would do with him. If that's the reason that he decides not to draft Isaiah Simmons, he is asking to be fired. That's the only thing that I can think of, because missing out on a player of that caliber and letting him slip until later in the first round for another team to just snatch up someone as good as him, that's inexcusable. This is one of those drafts for the Giants where they've already addressed positions of need, either through free agency over the last 2 years, through the draft over the last 2 years, or through trades. They've already addressed the offensive line. They've already addressed the quarterback. Sure, could they use another wide receiver? Yeah. Could they possibly use some extra depth? Somebody to play right tackle? Yeah. But what was so bad for the Giants last year? Their defense. It was horrible. Simmons would be an immediate day one starter on that defense. And if the Giants do not take him, they will have missed out. They will have made the biggest mistake probably in this draft. And I think it's as simple as that. With the level of talent and versatility and athleticism that Simmons has, he is a no-brainer. Realistically, if you ask me, he's probably the second best player in the draft. Second only to Chase Young. I think he's better than Okudah, and I think he's better than Burrow. The only difference is Burrow fits Cincinnati better, and Okudah fits Detroit better. Excuse me. But I think Simmons is better than both of those. And if the Giants don't take him at 4, they will have made just the biggest mistake of the early first round. And I think that's all I can say about that. Now, on to Miami. Miami is in an interesting situation. Last year, they were not very good. They were pretty bad. But this year, and just based on the talent that Miami decided to move away from last year, they now have 3 first-round draft picks. They pick first at 5. And this is what Kuiper says. Kuiper threw a curveball in here, and he thinks that Justin Herbert from Oregon will end up going to Miami. What? I mean, this might just be me. I don't see it. Do I like Herbert's frame? Yes. Do I like his arm talent? Yes. Do I like his decision making? Not as much. And that's where I kind of have the problem, is that Herbert really hasn't shown it to me to where he deserves to be a top 5 pick in this draft, especially above Tua Tagovailoa. Now, Herbert's got the NFL frame. He's 6'6" and 240 pounds. Awesome. He has the arm talent. Last year, he threw for almost 3,500 yards, 32 touchdowns for the Oregon Ducks. Awesome. Sure, he also threw 6 interceptions. Yeah, that's fine. But there were games where they realistically could have won, and he didn't show up. I mean, the one game that I think of with this is the Arizona State game. This was Oregon going into Arizona State. They needed to win the game to keep their playoff hopes alive because they had already won the Pac-12. But they needed the record. What does he do? He goes out there, throws 55% of his passes, 2 picks to go along with his 2 touchdowns. Of all the games that you need to lay an egg like that or not play to your best ability, of all the games, that's probably the biggest one. And at the same time, even in other games, I mean, the Rose Bowl, they won 28-27 against Wisconsin, but Herbert didn't play well. 14 of 20, sure, good percentage. He only threw for 128 yards, threw no touchdowns, and threw an interception. I don't know what to tell you. That's not a good day out of a star senior quarterback, if you ask me. Do I think Miami will take someone like Herbert? It's certainly possible. There's been a bit of buzz about Miami wanting Herbert instead of Tua, especially recently, and we'll get into why with the next pick. But a little bit of the other smoke that I've heard, and this is recently, this is as of today. The Miami Dolphins, I've heard, are planning on maybe even trading up to either 4 or 3. I don't see them giving up what they need to get up to 1 or 2, and I doubt Cincinnati trades that number 1 overall pick. But it would be interesting to see what Miami actually has to offer or actually will give up to go up and get the number 4 pick or the number 3 pick to, even more solidify their option of getting whichever quarterback they choose. Now, I think that they'll have that opportunity at the 5 with whatever pick they have, no matter which pick it is, if it's the 4 or 5. I think they'll have the opportunity to choose between Herbert, Tagovailoa, and whoever else in the field that they might look at. But I have heard that they're planning on maybe trading up. Nothing is materialized as of yet, but usually when there's smoke, there is fire. And speaking of the former Alabama quarterback, Mel Kiper has at number 6 to the Los Angeles Chargers, Tua Tagovailoa. And that's only because this is kind of that situation where Kiper says Herbert's going to Miami. So who does Los Angeles have there? Tagovailoa. And this is an interesting situation because they just lost their starting quarterback this offseason in Phillip Rivers, and he's been their guy for the last 20 years, give or take. But they also have a starting NFL level caliber quarterback in Tyrod Taylor. Do I think he's the best quarterback for that team? No. Do I think he's a good quarterback? Yeah, definitely. I think Tyrod Taylor is a very good NFL quarterback and could certainly lead the Chargers, to a higher level of success than they've had last year and the year before last. That gives them the option of taking a quarterback like Tagovailoa, letting him continue to rehab his multiple injuries that he sustained at Alabama in college, and possibly just save him for the future. And that's kind of the issue that I'm seeing a lot of teams are having with Tagovailoa is, yes, he is passing physicals. I saw one, a report from one team that I don't think if I'm not mistaken, they did not identify the team, but he failed the physical because, look at the list of injuries he's had over the last 3 years. What a pair of ankle surgeries, that insane hip injury that he sustained last season, and even before then, his knee and his other ankle. At this point, a lot of teams are looking at him and saying he's fragile. He isn't ready for the speed and strength of the NFL game because he'll get hurt again. And do I think that's possible? Yes. Do I think he goes to Los Angeles? And this is just me. I don't. I don't think the Chargers end up taking Tua. I think the Chargers end up going with one of the top offensive tackles or even the top defensive tackle in this year's draft. And speaking of that defensive tackle, moving on to the number 7 overall selection, the Carolina Panthers and new head coach Matt Rhule looking towards Derek Brown, the defensive tackle from Auburn. And if you watched any of Auburn's games this year, you will know that he is an absolute stud. He is extremely physical, extremely fast, and he's just a great nose tackle. He will day one be a huge addition to that Carolina defense. And the defense is something that Matt Rhule really, really relies on. So Derek Brown stands 6'5", 318 pounds. Last year, he had 33 solo tackles, 4 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles from the defensive tackle position. That's pretty tough. And the thing is, this is a big position of need for the Panthers. Now, as Kiper says, and I firmly agree with, if either Simmons or Okudah fall to 7, I don't think they'll hesitate. I think they'll look at those two guys and say, they're just better players. Do we need a defensive tackle? Yes. But at the same time, they'd be picking quality over position, over need. And I think that's what you have to do in this year's draft, where there is a lot of talent. You don't have to look at, all right, what position do I need? You have to look at who's the best player available. That's just the way that I look at it. Could you do a mix of both? Yes. In the case of the Detroit Lions, they have the option of both. They can look at it and say, we need a corner. We just lost our number one corner. Look, there's one sitting right here in Jeff Okudah. And I think that would be a no-brainer for them. But if Derek Brown is the only, or I shouldn't say only, is the defensive player available to the Panthers at 7, I think they snatch him up very, very quickly. I think he's a very, very good defensive tackle. He might not be, the most disruptive in the backfield, but he is certainly a run stopper, and he can certainly get in behind an offensive lineman. Speaking of offensive linemen, moving to number 8 with the Arizona Cardinals, Mel Kiper has Tristan Wirfs, the offensive tackle out of Iowa, going to the Cardinals at 8, being the first offensive tackle off the board. Now, this draft is full of offensive tackle talent. Tristan Wirfs he was a junior out of Iowa, 6'5", 322 pounds, very long arms, very, just really good. He's very physical. That said, I think he slots in more as a right tackle. I don't think he's a left tackle, which for a team like Arizona, that's kind of the position that they would need to be looking for. They could go defensive line here. I think they go offensive line just to try and protect Kyler Murray, because Kyler Murray was hit a lot last year. And for a guy of his stature and a guy of his position, those are the two things you don't want to happen, or those are the things you don't want to happen to your young quarterback, is let him get hit a whole lot. So no matter what, I think Arizona goes offensive line here. I'm not sure that they go Wirfs, though. I would probably be leaning more towards either Jedrick Wills or Mekhi Becton. That's just me. I prefer the talent or what those two guys bring a little bit more, but we'll talk about those guys a little bit later. Either way, I think at 8, the Cardinals go offensive tackle no matter what. Either way, Mel Kiper has Tristan Wirfs going here. Now down to Jacksonville, with Jacksonville taking the first wide receiver off the board, that being Alabama's Jerry Jeudy. And if you watched Alabama at all, Jerry Jeudy is a wide receiver who kind of puts it all together. He's big, strong, physical. He's a great route runner. He's got great hands. He's very good after the catch. And what's even more interesting to me about watching Jerry Jeudy play is how good he is at blocking. And that's not necessarily something that's taught to wide receivers in the game nowadays, is they aren't always taught, okay, here's how you place a good block. This is what you do. And I don't know if that's what he was taught at Alabama, but Jerry Jeudy is very good at it. And if the Jaguars are really leaning on their rookie quarterback, or their former rookie quarterback from last year, Gardner Minshew, who performed really well for the Jags in his time on the field, I think he was very good. They need to bring him another weapon. I do think that they take a wide receiver here. They either take wide receiver or offensive line, seeing as this is kind of where all 3 or 4 of those offensive linemen stand to be going. Jacksonville is probably another one of those teams where if they're available, they very well could go for a defensive lineman, a defensive tackle. If Derek Brown falls to 9 instead of going 7, the Jags are a team that very well could go for someone like him. But I agree. I think it'll be one of the wide receivers, and I do think it will and should be Jerry Jeudy going at 9 to the Jags. Drafting 10th overall is the Cleveland Browns, and realistically, they are a team that last year should not be drafting this highly. They should not be drafting at 10. They're a team that is stocked with offensive talent, and according to Kiper, and I agree, I think the Browns will be going offensive line here just to add a little bit of depth, add a complement to new signing Jack Conklin. Jack Conklin plays right tackle. Now they need a left tackle. And Mel Kiper has them going after from Louisville, the offensive tackle, Mekhi Becton, who is just a monster. I'm a big fan of his, especially after I saw what he did at the combine. He is an athlete. He's a physical freak. He is extremely athletic. Becton is 6'7" and 364 pounds. And if I can find it, I think he ran a sub 6-second 40 time, I want to say. Well, either way, not a big deal. He ran very, very quickly, especially for a man of his stature. There is only one issue that I see that maybe could cause him to fall past some teams that really are looking for offensive linemen. He did have a flagged drug test just before the draft for, I think it was just for marijuana. They are still taking those drug tests, even with the new CBA. The new CBA terms about that do not go into effect until next season. And excuse me, I do think Becton will still go high. I feel like teams are not worried about this. He's one of those players that really, really could add a lot of value just based on the fact that he could bring so many different things to the table with that size, with that athleticism. You realistically could shift him to most offensive line positions, and playing him at left tackle would be perfect, especially across the line from Jack Conklin. And keeping on the subject of offensive linemen, picking at 11, the New York Jets are slated to, at that point, take an offensive lineman. Their general manager, Joe Douglas, is very focused on fixing this offensive line, and I think the moves that he's made in free agency thus far have really solidified that. And I think that they will. I agree with Mel Kiper. I think that they take an offensive lineman here. And in this draft, the two that are available left are Jedrick Wills out of Alabama and Andrew Thomas out of Georgia. It's weird. I like them both, and I appreciate what both of them do and are good at. But I think Wills is just a little bit better. He's just better than Thomas. And I think the Jets go with Wills if he's available. He played right tackle in college. I could certainly see him shift to left tackle. He's certainly athletic enough, certainly quick enough, and certainly physical enough. He was very good in the run game for the Crimson Tide of Alabama last year. And I really do think having someone like Jedrick Wills will help their signing Le'Veon Bell from last season get going, even after a slow start to his Jets tenure. Then picking at 12, this is another one that this is one that'll be interesting. The Las Vegas Raiders, new to Las Vegas, are picking at 12, and Kiper has them taking CJ Henderson, the corner out of Florida, who I think I'm a big fan of. I like him a lot. He played very well in the SEC, especially in the SEC East. He was very good for Florida. But the thing here is that the Raiders have a weird situation at quarterback. They have Derek Carr, who started for them for the last, 4 or 5 years. They have a coach who I don't think is necessarily sure of Carr, and then they bring in Marcus Mariota. And Kiper even mentions in his little kind of snippet here about them possibly bringing in a quarterback from this draft. Now, the Raiders do have another first-round pick later in this draft, and I think they get to a quarterback there. I'm not sure. But the Raiders here definitely, if they decide to take CJ Henderson, will not be losing much there. Even if they don't go wide receiver, which they very well could. At this point, there are another 3 really, really good wide receivers available in the top end of this draft. But if they go CJ Henderson, one would not surprise me, and 2 would not be much of a loss. He is an incredible talent, and I think he will likely go top 15. Then picking at 13, the San Francisco 49ers, even though they went to the Super Bowl last year, they traded DeForest Buckner to the Colts for the number 13 overall pick. Mel Kiper has them taking CeeDee Lamb, the wide receiver out of Oklahoma. The 49ers lost Emmanuel Sanders in free agency, a veteran wide receiver. And I think CeeDee Lamb would be a huge pickup for the Niners here. And it realistically would just kind of solidify themselves as both an offensive and a defensive team. It would add a lot of versatility to that offensive lineup. He is a can't miss prospect. I think no matter where he goes, he will succeed. He's a great route runner, great technician with the ball in his hands, and he would be a great complement to 49ers wide receiver Deebo Samuel. This is San Francisco's first of 2 first-round draft picks. Would not be surprised if they go wide receiver here. And here's where we get into the middle of the pack. So 14 overall, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It would not surprise me if they go offensive line. They would likely need some help, even though they need some help offensively on that offensive line, even after they signed a good couple, including Joe Haeg. I do think Andrew Thomas is the last available, really top tier offensive tackle. And I agree with Kiper here that the Bucs should go offensive line, and with Andrew Thomas kind of the last available of that top group, I think he goes at 14. Then to the Denver Broncos. One of the hottest names out of the draft and just out of last season in general is Justin Jefferson, the wide receiver out of LSU. He is very, very good. Very good hands. Very, very speedy. He caught 111 passes last year and 18 touchdowns, playing for the national champion LSU Tigers. And then he goes to the draft and then performs better. Yeah, he at the draft had a 4.43 40-yard dash. He tips the scale coming in at, I think he's over 6 foot. Oh, it's not actually coming up. That's weird. No, I said that's Justin Jefferson, not Jordan. I don't know who Jordan Jefferson is, but it's Justin Jefferson, and ESPN is just broken. So he's very good. He would be a great addition to the Denver Broncos. Realistically, I think that they will go for a wide receiver. Their defense is stout as is, still led by Von Miller. They need another wide receiver, or they need a little bit more talent offensively to put around their new young quarterback, Drew Lock. I think for Lock to be successful, the Broncos need to use the 15 pick to get some offensive talent, and it'll either be Justin Jefferson or one of those other players, like if Henry Ruggs or CeeDee Lamb are available there. Just now hitting the halfway mark at number 16, the Atlanta Falcons. They need some help defensively. They lost a ton of defensive talent this offseason, be that either for Vic Beasley or Dante Fowler. Oh, they swapped Vic Beasley for Dante Fowler. He really does. They still need some help. They have holes at edge, corner, and defensive tackle. Kiper has them picking K'Lavon Chaisson out of LSU, the outside linebacker / edge rusher. I think he fills both of those positions very well. He is both good in coverage and in the pass rush. And as Kiper says, I think after Chase Young, Chaisson is likely the best pure edge rusher. Even though Chaisson does fill both of those roles, I do think he is the best edge rusher after Chase Young. And a team like the Falcons really does need that type of help. Moving on to the Cowboys, the Dallas Cowboys. And, this is one that I have to agree again with Kiper on. He has the Cowboys going with arguably the best safety in the draft, Xavier McKinney out of Alabama. I'm a big fan of Xavier McKinney. He played extremely well against Ole Miss in that game in Tuscaloosa, and I think he has all the talent in the world, and I think he will certainly be a difference maker at the NFL level, whether he goes to the Cowboys or wherever he goes. Even though the Cowboys already went out and picked up another safety in free agency, they went out and picked up Clinton Dix. They lost a lot of talent on that defense, and I think Xavier McKinney for that team could be both the present and the future of that safety position, especially if they can lock him up long term. And yes, if you guys could not tell, just based on where we're at in the draft right now, um, this stream is going to be a little bit of a longer one. So picking at 18, the Miami Dolphins step back up to the table. This is their selection that they got for Minkah Fitzpatrick from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Kiper has them going defense here. Defensive line, Javon Kinlaw out of South Carolina, another defensive lineman. Even though Miami went out and tried to address a lot of their defensive struggles during this offseason, especially in free agency, where they kind of just threw money at it, I agree. I do think that they go defense here. Whether Kinlaw is available here or not is going to be the question mark. I think they'll either go with Kinlaw or they might go for more of an edge linebacker type player. Might go for Kenneth Murray or even someone like Zach Bond if they really want to reach for it. With everything considered, though, I do think Miami goes for someone like Kinlaw, and he's just a big physical presence. He could play nose and can slide out to play end of an defensive line if the Dolphins are playing 3-4 instead of 4-3. Speaking of teams that are on their second first-round draft pick, back to Vegas, back to the Las Vegas Raiders. This is their second first-round pick. They got this one from Chicago in the Khalil Mack trade. 19, the Vegas Raiders, Kiper has them selecting Jordan Love, the quarterback out of Utah State. I don't know. This is one where I think I have to actively disagree with the draft expert. I don't think the Raiders are going to go for a quarterback. I don't see why they need one, because I think Derek Carr is a good enough NFL quarterback, and Mariota is a more than serviceable backup. I mean, whether he fits the system that Gruden's trying to put in place or not, that's to be debated. I don't think Mariota's a great fit there, but Derek Carr certainly is a fit. He played well last year. He's played well before in his career. To me, Jordan Love just hasn't shown it at the college level that he really has what it takes. And I agree more with his kind of secondary option that the Raiders go for a wide receiver at 19, try and put some more talent in the offensive side of the ball, especially after already taking Henderson and getting some extra talent in the skill positions on defense. Jordan Love, I do think he goes in the first round. He played well-ish the last 2 years. 2018 was his big breakout year for Utah State. 2018 season, he completed 64% of his passes, threw over 3,500 yards, 32 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. Whereas last year, he only threw for 3,400, lower completion percentage, less touchdowns, 17 interceptions. I don't know if that necessarily tells you anything about him, but I think the sample size is too small and too inconsistent to really put top 20 on a player like Jordan Love. Now, third in a row, another team on their second first-round draft pick, the Jacksonville Jaguars. This is the pick that they're getting from Los Angeles in the Jalen Ramsey trade. And this pick has been one that Kiper's had a little bit of trouble with, which I completely understand why. The Jaguars have a lot of needs, including off-ball linebacker, defensive line, tight end, corner, right tackle, wide receiver, anything. So in the case that Jacksonville goes after a wide receiver at 9 and goes out and gets someone like either CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy, I and Kiper expect the Jags to go for a defensive player here. And the likely one there is Kenneth Murray, the linebacker out of Oklahoma. Oklahoma, I should say that is. Kenneth Murray was very good last year. Actually, the last 2 years has been very, very good. I don't think he played the entire season last year. I'm not sure he played in every single game. He only had 102, or I should say only. He had 102 tackles last year, 69 solo tackles, whereas in 2018 he had 71 total tackles and 155 total. Nonetheless, I think he is a bruiser of a linebacker. Very good. He is an extreme athlete and just a tackling machine. He can play anywhere on the second half of that defensive line in that front seven. He can play inside or outside linebacker and still can drop into coverage. I think he'd be a great pick for the Jags if they decided to go with him at number 20. Drafting at 21, the Philadelphia Eagles, they need some help. Their pick here should realistically be the best wide receiver that's available. It should be anybody. It should be, in this case, Henry Ruggs III out of Alabama. He is one of the fastest players in this year's draft. Out and out, speedy, very fast. And I remember seeing him live. I mean, well, not in person, I should say, but man, is he good. He is so fast. Just so good. He torched Ole Miss a good couple times in that game, and I remember watching that game front to back, as disappointing as it was. But no matter what, the Eagles should go for wide receiver here. That is a huge hole in their offense. They really don't have any great starting wide receivers right now. Really not much else to say about this pick. Drafting 22nd, the Minnesota Vikings. I think this is their first of two. Yes, this is their first of two first-round draft picks. This is the draft pick that they got from Buffalo in the Stefon Diggs trade. And Kiper has them going after a wide receiver. This is as he says, this is a very deep wide receiver draft, and it would not be surprising if they decide to go after someone to not replace, but kind of mitigate the loss of Stefon Diggs. And Mel Kiper has them selecting Brandon Ayuk out of Arizona State. I really do like Ayuk. I like him. He's such a great playmaker. He averaged 18.3 yards per catch. He's very athletic. Thing is, though, to me, I don't know if Ayuk is this high of a first-round talent. I think he's good. I think even though he does have a long frame, very long wingspan, 81-inch wingspan, which really does help his ability to kind of get at any ball that's thrown near him. I'm not sure if his frame is big enough or strong enough for the NFL game. Ayuk is 6 foot and only 200 pounds. He's very lean, I don't want to say skinny, because he's certainly not skinny. He is athletic, very strong guy, but he's very lean, very slender. But I do think if he were to go at 22, or I should say if he weren't to go at 22, I could certainly see the Vikings going after a defensive player after having lost a little bit of their edge rush in Everson Griffin this offseason. Drafting at 23 is the New England Patriots. This is a tough one. Because, and as Kiper mentions, Bill Belichick is hard to predict. He's unpredictable with his draft selections because he's very good at evaluating talent and value at whatever selection. And who Kiper has here is Zach Bond, an outside linebacker from Wisconsin. This is a team that Bond would really fit well into, especially with that defense. Bond, who broke out last season, had 12.5 sacks and 19.5 total tackles for loss. And the thing is, the Patriots lost a bunch of linebackers this offseason. They lost Kyle Van Noy, Jamie Collins, Landon Roberts. And those are guys that you need to have versatility as well as athleticism to replace. And a guy like Zach Bond would slot in extremely well. Drafting at number 24 is the New Orleans Saints. I don't know if any of my friends who are Saints fans are watching right now, but this is who Kiper has drafting for you guys, and it would not surprise me if the Saints did. If they went after A.J. Terrell, the corner out of Clemson. I don't think New Orleans needs a lot of help offensively, so this would really only make sense for them to go after a defensive player, and I do think it will be a corner because they are losing Eli Apple. As much as I think Eli Apple is not very good, he did fill that spot on the team. And they obviously, if you're losing a guy that filled an important spot, especially a skill position player on the defensive side of the ball, like a corner or a safety in that secondary, you need to replace them. You need to have an adequate replacement. And I think someone like A.J. Terrell, or even the guy who is projected to go 25th, Jalen Johnson, either of those two guys would be very good replacements for someone like Eli Apple. Terrell is very physically gifted, very athletic, He ran a 4.42 40. He's 6'1". He was inconsistent last year for Clemson, but I do think his physicality and his talent will kind of slot him into that late first round. Drafting 25th, as I mentioned, again, it is the Minnesota Vikings. This is their second and final first round draft selection. Jalen Johnson, the cornerback out of Utah. He kind of fits the role. He's a long guy. He isn't necessarily, a first round guy. He doesn't necessarily get that type of grade, but he fits the role and he fits what Mike Zimmer wants in a defensive back. He played 2019 season with a torn labrum, so not every team will know actually how good he was last year because he played last year with an injury the entire season. Johnson, again, an athletic, long cornerback. And, he will be, if he does go to Minnesota, he would be a great fit there, where they lost 3 defensive backs, including Xavier Rhodes and Trey Waynes last season or during this offseason. I could certainly see Minnesota using the 25 pick here to go after a defensive player, especially a defensive back. Now we're getting towards the end. Going to number 26 selection, the Miami Dolphins have their third and final first round pick. And again, to me, that's just wild. That's insane to me. This is the pick that they got from Houston in the, who was it? Laramie Tunsil trade. Excuse me, the Laramie Tunsil trade. Miami Dolphins, Kiper has them selecting Antoine Winfield Jr. He's a safety corner combo from Minnesota. He's good. He's just so good. As Kiper says, he's a Swiss Army knife. He kind of fits any defensive back position that you need. The only problem that I could see a lot of people having with him is his size. He is extremely athletic, but he's not necessarily that big. He's only 5'10", 205 pounds, but he really does make up for that with how he plays, and he can play realistically any position. Just last season, he had 85 total tackles, 62 total tackles from the defensive back position. He played both extensively. Excuse me. He had 7 picks. Again, the size would be the issue, but I think no matter where he goes, Winfield can kind of carve out a spot for him no matter where he goes. He's a very, very solid defensive back. Picking 27th is the Seattle Seahawks. And this is one that's tough. Seattle realistically needs some help on the offensive side of the ball. It's either, excuse me, this one's going a little bit long. Seattle's one of those teams that doesn't have a whole lot of need. I realistically think that they could go one of two ways. I think they could either go edge rusher, especially with them losing Jadeveon Clowney in free agency, or where Mel Kiper has them going is interior offensive line with Cesar Ruiz coming out of Michigan. I think Seattle will go either one of those two ways. I don't think there's much of a question because they don't need much. They don't need a wide receiver. They certainly don't need a quarterback or a running back. And a lot of that defense is still very good. So they could use some extra force on the edge in their edge rush, but they could definitely always use a little bit more protection and a little bit more depth in the interior of that offensive line in protecting Russell Wilson. Now picking 28th is the Baltimore Ravens, and even though they had an incredible season last season, they end up selecting 28th before the end of in the end of the first round, and they could use some help at really two positions. They upgraded their defensive line a little bit, even though they lost a couple. They went out and traded for Calais Campbell from Jacksonville and signed Derek Wolfe from Denver. But they really haven't found their solution at inside linebacker when they lost CJ Mosley to the Jets last offseason, where he went there for a big money contract. And that kind of interior presence was really lost, and the impact was felt by the Ravens. I mean, if you watch that playoff game against the Titans, Derrick Henry just had all the room in the world. He just, he ran all over that interior of the Ravens. So Kiper has them going for an inside linebacker, selecting Patrick Queen, the inside linebacker from LSU. I agree with that pick. I think they either go for that working on the second half of that front seven, or they go for a guard, an offensive guard, after Marshall Yanda retired this offseason. It's either one of those two ways, if you ask me. Now, the Tennessee Titans pick 29th, and this is one where, again, I'm not so sure about. Kiper has them selecting Yetur Matos out of Penn State. He's a defensive end, edge rusher / kind of outside linebacker. He's very athletic, very strong. I watched him extensively whenever I got to see Penn State. You see him anytime he's on the field, and you saw him especially in that game against Memphis. He was very good, very disruptive. And if the Titans decide to go that way, that is certainly something that they could do. That defensive line, they lost Jarrell Casey. They ended up picking up Vic Beasley Jr. on a 1-year deal in free agency. But I do think that if you ask me, and I'm no draft expert, but just knowing what the Titans need, I could see them actually going for a wide receiver here. This is a deep wide receiver draft, and the next pick, the one that Kiper has going 30th to the Packers, I could certainly see the Titans selecting him. I mean, they've already got A.J. Brown, a very, very good young wide receiver, and he was exceptional last year. But I could certainly see them just saying, okay, well, what did we miss in our playoff loss to the eventual Super Bowl winning Kansas City Chiefs? They were kind of missing some offensive spark. They were missing, that little bit of jump. So I could certainly see them going and selecting T. Higgins or one of the other wide receivers that's available. Maybe even, no, certainly not a running back, but I could certainly see them going for a skill position player instead of a defensive end. But if they were deciding to go for Gross Matos, I could certainly see him filling in a good spot in that defensive front seven. And then, as I already said, picking 30th is the Green Bay Packers, and Kiper has them selecting T. Higgins, the wide receiver out of Clemson. And this is a team that really, again, could use some help for, at this point, their aging veteran quarterback. And T. Higgins in college was awesome. He was so very good for Clemson, and he's a sizable receiver. He's certainly got the speed and the route running ability. And I mean, this is a guy coming in. He's already 6'4", 215 pounds, and last year had 59 catches, 1,100 yards, and 13 touchdowns. He averaged almost 20 yards a catch. He is speedy, big. He's got the hands. And realistically, for the Packers to try and kind of get what they can out of the last couple years of Aaron Rodgers' career, they've got to give him something else. He can't just throw every single pass to either Jimmy Graham or Devontae Adams. It's as simple as that. So either way, I think the Packers go offense here. Whether T. Higgins is there and available is yet to be seen. Moving along, only 2 more picks in the first round of the draft. And like I said earlier, I'm only going to be talking about the first round. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I see now that this stream is going on an hour. The crowd has grown just a little bit. Thank you all for tuning in. Picking number 31 is the San Francisco 49ers. This is where Kiper has them picking defense, where I'm not sure that they necessarily need help defensively. They had one of the top defenses in the NFL last season, but it would not be surprising if they decided to stock up on a little bit of depth there. Their general manager, John Lynch, is usually very focused on adding depth to positions that they're already very good at. If you look, even last year and the last couple of years, they've had the depth to move along from some of their top level talent to get some extra picks or some other talent at other positions. Now, this is a last name. Fingers crossed I can get it right. It's Noah Ingbinogene. I want to say Igbinogene from Auburn. I think I said that right. Fingers crossed. He was very good at Auburn last year. He had 42 total tackles, 28 solo, no interceptions, no forced fumbles, 7 pass defenses or scored pass defenses. He's raw, but he's got a lot of that talent that you really think if you have a good defensive coach, you can refine that into a star corner. The thing is with the Niners, this is one of those other only needs that they need filled is their corner position. Because yes, they have Richard Sherman, but he's already going on 32. He's going on 32 years old. He's only signed through 2020. So after this season, he's off his contract. Whether he re-signs in San Francisco is yet to be seen. I don't think so. At that point in his career, the Niners will likely have tried to find a replacement for him. But here's the thing, the Niners very well could trade down from this position. There is still a lot of talent with the defensive backs later on in this draft. But at the same time, if they were to try and go for somebody raw that they could probably form into a starting cornerback this season, Hingbinogene would be somebody that they could certainly go for. Last but not least, in the first round, number 32 pick overall, the Kansas City Chiefs. Selecting DeAndre Swift, running back out of Georgia. Now, there aren't many teams in this first round that have a hole at running back. And I just want to take a look at their depth chart just to see what I think of who they have. Because I know they still have Damian Williams, but I don't know if they have any talent apart from him. Because the thing is with Damian Williams, he isn't necessarily that kind of speedy running back, that elusive running back. He's very good between the tackles. He's a strong runner. Whereas DeAndre Swift is, I wouldn't say he's not a strong runner, but he's more elusive. He's faster. He's very, very good in the passing game. And that's something certainly that Andy Reid would like to have. Yeah, for some reason, ESPN is being kind of slow and broken, so I'm not even going to bother. DeAndre Swift, I think, would perform well at the Kansas City Chiefs, but I don't know. I feel like the Super Bowl champs, the Kansas City Chiefs, I think they would be better off going for a defensive player, probably somebody to help shore up that secondary a little bit, or a defensive lineman, or even an offensive guard. I think those are positions that have higher need than running back, but I don't think DeAndre Swift would be a bad selection at all. Whew. Man, that was a marathon. That was that was a lot. That is all I have for you guys this afternoon. If you guys have anything for me, please put it up in the chat real quick for me. I'll be sure to get to it before I sign off. I am so very excited. So excited for the draft tomorrow night. At home, I promise I will have, my TV, 2 other devices, catching up on everything going on. I will be glued to that tomorrow night. And the only other thing that I will leave you guys with is come Friday. So if you were looking for more baseball will be back next week. I will be talking about the other 2 divisions of baseball that I have not gotten to yet, the AL Central and the AL East. I will get to those next week. On Friday, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the mock draft again, this 4.0 from Mel Kiper, and I'm going to pull up the actual draft selections because tomorrow night will be the first round of the draft. So, of course, by Friday evening, everybody will have already, not already said their piece, but they will have already kind of made their distinctions and kind of had a little bit of time to look at the draft and simmer through kind of what happened in the first round. So we'll get into that on Friday afternoon. I just love having stuff to talk about, especially when it's stuff that is timely and stuff that's, recent. I like talking about that kind of stuff. It's a lot of fun for me. And this is something else that I'd like to ask you guys about. After baseball, I'm not sure what kind of content you guys would like me to go into. There have been a couple different plans for both the NBA and the NHL season. Both of those 2 seasons were already midway through when the whole pandemic and all the cancellations happened. So at first I didn't plan on talking about those just because the season's already half over. They're getting ready towards playoffs, and they aren't really sure what they're going to do with those seasons, as it's they're already in their downturn. So I was thinking what I could do is just kind of taking those leagues where they're at right this second, going through maybe some playoffs, maybe taking a look at a couple different situations that could happen, how those leagues are looking at possibly restarting, and having probably, probably two episodes of each, one for each conference, looking at playoff matchups, that kind of thing. Uh, let me know either in the chat, if you guys talk to me outside of just me streaming. Let me know what you guys think of that idea. I will probably post a poll about it or some sort of questionnaire either on my Instagram story or on Twitter, maybe even Snapchat. But please, if you guys think those are good ideas, let me know. I would love to just keep streaming and I would like to keep giving you guys content, giving you guys sports information and just something to watch, something to do in the whole quarantine thing that we have going on right now. But if you guys do not have anything else for me, this has been Just G Live. We are getting ready for the NFL draft tomorrow night. Everything will be streamed, everything will be on TV. It will be very, very interesting to see. But until Friday afternoon at 5 p.m., talking post first round NFL draft. I'll see you guys then. Peace.